The news spread like fire across the world. When 2,000 Deathworlders were coming to Earth, everyone talked about them. People said they were not like humans. They came from a planet so deadly that even their air could burn through steel, and their oceans could crush metal ships, yet they were strong. They were proud they were called Deathworlders because they were born on a planet where everything tried to kill them every second of their life. They said Earth was a soft place for them, a calm land compared to what they had known all their lives. So when their giant ship entered Earth's sky, people stood in awe. The air cracked like thunder. The clouds burned bright and then cleared to reveal a long silver shape slowly landing on a barren stretch of land that was once home to a human city long ago, now called the Danger Zone. The Danger Zone was a dead region filled with old ruins, strange fog, and twisted trees. It was a place no one dared to go. The ground glowed at night, and strange shapes moved in the dark. Some said it was radiation, others said it was cursed. But to the Deathworlders it looked like a challenge, and challenges were what they lived for. The world watched from safe distances. Drones and satellites hovered above as their massive ship opened, and 2,000 of them stepped out tall, built like stone, their armor shining, their eyes sharp. They stood like warriors of an old legend, and when their leader raised his hand, they all moved in perfect order, spreading out to set their base. Scientists from Earth watched the data coming in, amazed and terrified. At the same time, they could see how quickly the Deathworlders adapted. They built shelters in hours, tested the soil, made maps of the area. They even joked through their radios, calling Earth a gentle planet compared to their world. It was strange for humans to hear that because the Danger Zone was the deadliest place on Earth, but to the Deathworlders, it was like a walk in the park, or at least that was what they believed, at first. The first night was quiet. The wind howled through the empty buildings and the fog rolled in like a white sea. The Deathworlders stood guard, their senses alert. They were trained for survival. They didn't fear the dark. They had faced worse back home. Yet some of them said they felt watched. They heard distant cries that didn't belong to animals. They dismissed it, thinking it was just the wind, but the unease stayed. The next morning, they started exploring deeper into the zone. Broken roads led to half-buried towers. Twisted metal poles rose like bones from the ground, and strange green light flickered in pools of water. They collected samples and took readings. But their scanners began to act strange, giving wrong results and shutting down. Some blamed the magnetic field. Others said the machines couldn't understand the place. It didn't follow normal rules. Back in control stations outside the zone, human scientists began to worry. One of the communication links had started to fade, and the feed from one drone showed odd static shapes moving behind the Deathworlders, almost like shadows with form, but no clear body. The scientists tried to warn them, but the storm interference blocked signals most of the time. Still, the Deathworlders pressed on, confident, proud, sure that nothing could hurt them here. On the 5th day, they lost contact with a scouting group of 20 soldiers. The group had gone beyond the river near the old nuclear plant. The last message they sent was a calm report saying they were heading toward a strange light. Then silence. Days passed and search parties found nothing. Not a single trace of them, no gear, no tracks. It was as if the ground had swallowed them whole. Their leader ordered new scans of the area, but the data came back corrupted, every image twisted by static. Even the weather changed. The calm sky turned gray, and the wind began to sound like whispers through the broken streets at night. The fog glowed faintly, and sometimes it looked like faces forming inside it. The Deathworlders laughed it off, saying Earth was trying to scare them, but some could not sleep anymore. A week later, one of the guards reported movement outside the camp. They followed footprints that ended suddenly near an old tunnel inside. They found walls covered in strange marks, not written by humans, not written by anything they could recognize. The walls pulsed faintly like they were alive. They took samples, but the samples turned to dust before they could test them. Earth Control sent a warning telling them to consider retreat. But pride ran deep in the Deathworlders' hearts. They had survived volcanic storms and acid rain back home. They could not turn back. Now they believed they could master any world if they only pushed harder, so they moved further north toward the heart of the zone. They built a second camp near the remains of the old research base. Humans had abandoned years ago. The building stood broken, but inside, they found sealed rooms filled with old papers and messages scratched into the walls, words that said, "Stay away from the lights and don't trust the voices." The messages were written over and over in different handwriting, as if by many people losing their minds. The Deathworlders didn't believe in ghosts, they believed in facts, but even their strongest scanners showed strange heat signals where no life should exist. Something was moving under the ground, and sometimes the ground itself seemed to breathe. They started losing equipment. Their lights flickered, their drones crashed, their water supplies turned black overnight. At this point, even the strongest among them began to feel uneasy. They noticed that the longer they stayed, the slower time seemed to move. Some days felt like weeks, others like minutes. Their clocks all showed different times, and no one could tell why. They began to argue about directions. Some said the camp was shifting its position slightly each night, as if the land itself was changing under them. One night a bright flash filled the sky and all power shut down when the lights came back. Half their food storage was gone, no tracks, no intruder marks, only silence. They stood guard all night waiting for an attack that never came. One soldier said he saw figures at the edge of the fog, tall and thin, moving in strange jerks. But when others looked, there was nothing. Days later, the sickness began. Some Deathworlders started coughing up black dust, others lost memory. They would walk out of camp not remembering who they were or why they came. One man was found standing in the rain, staring at the sky, repeating the same words, "We are not supposed to be here." By the 10th day, their numbers had dropped to 1,900. They tried to radio for help, but the signals were trapped in loops, repeating their own voices back at them, slightly delayed, as if something was mimicking them. They burned parts of the camp, thinking it would stop whatever was happening. But the ground hissed and the air turned colder instead. From the control center far away, human scientists begged them to come back. But their leader refused, saying they were close to finding the truth. He said they came to prove that Deathworlders could conquer any world. He said fear was only a test. But deep down, even he began to wonder if this test was one they were never meant to take. When the 12th night came, the fog didn't lift. It covered everything thick like a wall. They could not see each other, even from a few feet away. And the sound of footsteps echoed from all directions, some belonging to no one they could find. They fired flares into the air, but the light bent around them, vanishing into the mist like it was swallowed. By morning, 50 more were gone. No alarms, no signs of struggle, they simply vanished. Their tents left untouched, their weapons still loaded. They searched for days but found nothing, only more strange lights that blinked and moved away whenever they came near. The Deathworlders began to lose faith for the first time in their proud history, and yet they stayed because they had come too far to return. They told themselves they were the strongest beings in the galaxy. They could not accept defeat. They rebuilt their camp and wrote new orders. Stay together. Never go alone. Never follow the lights. They followed the rules for a few days, but it didn't help because the zone didn't care for rules. By the end of the second week, their leader stood looking at the endless gray land, feeling something he had never felt before. A small whisper inside his mind saying, "Leave now, while you still can." He ignored it. But deep down, he knew something was watching, something older than they could understand, something that was never meant to be disturbed. The zone was not just dangerous, it was alive, and it had noticed them. The days passed slowly, and the Deathworlders grew more restless. They had come with pride and strength. But now they were surrounded by silence that felt heavy and alive. Their leader walked through the camp, watching his people move like shadows, their eyes dull and tired. Some worked on broken machines, trying to fix scanners that kept showing strange energy moving below them like veins under the ground. Others stood guard with weapons in hand, looking out into the fog, hoping to see something clear, but there was nothing, only shifting shapes that faded when they stared too long. The control center far away kept trying to reach them, but the radio cracked and whispered like it had a mind of its own. When messages did come through, they were twisted. The voices came back deeper, slower, like someone was repeating them but not quite human. The scientists begged them to leave, but the leader said they needed answers. He wanted to understand what was happening. He wanted to prove that no world, no matter how dangerous, could break them. He didn't know that this decision would destroy nearly all of them. At night, the fog thickened again. It crawled between their tents like smoke, and when it touched metal, it left small marks like burns. One soldier woke screaming that something had entered his tent, but when they checked, there was no one inside, only footprints that started from the middle of the floor and led outside before vanishing into the mud. They searched for hours and found nothing. The man kept shaking, saying he heard his own voice calling him from outside. The next morning, another patrol went missing, 4 soldiers this time. They had been guarding the north boundary near the broken bridge when they vanished. One of their trackers showed strange movement going in circles over and over, then stopped. Suddenly the others went to check, but the bridge itself looked different now. Longer, narrower, like it had changed shape overnight. They crossed it slowly, and when they reached the other side, they found the helmets of their friends arranged in a line facing the forest. There were no bodies, no weapons, just helmets and deep handprints pressed into the wet ground like something had dragged them away. Fear began to grow, but they tried to hide it. They told themselves the zone was just playing tricks on them. Maybe gas leaks or magnetic storms. But no one believed it anymore. Their food tasted bitter. Their water turned cloudy even after purification, and their skin itched under their armor. Some of them started talking to themselves, whispering names no one else knew. They would stop when noticed. But their eyes looked lost, like they were listening to someone else far away. One engineer named Lyra found something strange in the data. She had been checking old signals from the ruined research base near their camp. She said the base had sent hundreds of emergency calls before it was abandoned, but none of them ever reached the outside world. She played one of the old recordings. The voice on it was human. A woman crying, saying, it's awake, it knows we are here." Then the recording cut off. The Deathworlders listened in silence. Some laughed nervously, others turned away pretending not to care, but deep down the words stuck in their minds. That night Lyra disappeared. Her tent was empty. Her tools still there. Her footprints led toward the old research building and stopped near a hole in the floor. They sent a team down to search, but the hole was deeper than they thought it went into. A long tunnel filled with strange black roots that pulsed faintly like they were breathing. The tunnel stretched far under the zone, and the air inside was hot and wet like the inside of a living thing. The search team came back pale and shaking. One of them said they heard breathing behind them even though no one was there. Another said he felt hands on his back pushing him forward. After that, the leader ordered no one to go near the tunnels, but curiosity never dies easily. One group sneaked out later trying to find Lyra. They thought maybe she was still alive. They never returned. The next morning the camp woke to find their tents surrounded by symbols drawn in black mud in shapes no one could understand. They cleaned them away, but new ones appeared again at night. The weather turned worse. The wind carried voices that sounded familiar. Sometimes it was the voice of a friend, sometimes a family member, sometimes even their own voice calling them to come outside. One man followed the sound and walked straight into the fog. He never came back. Another tried to stop him but was pulled back by others who swore they saw a shadow grab his arm. Though nothing was there, the camp lights flickered and went out for hours, leaving only the faint glow from the sky that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. They began burning parts of the forest, thinking the fire might clear the fog, but the smoke twisted upward and came back down around them like a circle. The flames didn't spread like normal. They bent and moved sideways as if blocked by something, invisible when the fire died out. The ground looked different, black and cracked with shapes that looked like eyes staring up from below. One soldier fell to his knees, saying he could hear something moving under his feet, like the world itself was, whispering his name. The sickness spread faster now. Their medics couldn't explain it. Their blood turned darker, their veins showing through the skin like black lines. They felt cold even under the sun, and they began to dream the same dream every night. They were standing in a wide open field with no sky and no sound, only a low hum that grew louder until it became a scream when they woke. Their ears rang and their noses bled. They stopped sleeping, but the dreams kept coming even with open eyes. One day the leader gathered everyone left and told them they would move to higher ground near the central ridge. Maybe they could see the end of the fog from there. Maybe they could find a place where their machines worked. Again, the march was slow, the ground soft and sticky like it was alive, swallowing their boots. The fog followed them, even under bright daylight, and the wind carried the faint smell of burning metal. As they climbed the ridge, they saw shapes moving below them through the fog. At first they thought it was just more of their people lost in the zone, but the shapes were too large, too wrong in how they moved. One moment tall, one moment crawling. The leader ordered not to shoot, but some fired anyway. The bullets vanished into the fog and came back moments later, landing behind them without a single sound. That was when they finally understood that the zone was not just dangerous. It was aware. It was watching. It was playing with them. By night they reached the ridge and set camp again. They counted their numbers. They were down to about 1,600, some too weak to stand, others trembling and silent. The leader looked over the fog-covered land below, and for the first time he felt small. He realized Earth was not what they thought it was. The zone was not a part of Earth. It was something else, something that didn't follow any law of nature. He looked at his hands shaking and wondered if their strength meant anything here. Later that night, he stood outside his tent listening. The fog below moved like waves. He could hear faint sounds like whispers and distant laughter. He turned to see his people sleeping, some twitching in their dreams, some talking softly. He felt tired, heavier than ever. Before, he thought about home, about his planet that tried to kill him every day. But he had survived that place. And now this quiet planet that humans feared had broken him in just 2 weeks. He didn't know how to face the truth that maybe humans had learned long ago to stay away. Not because they were weak, but because they understood fear better than anyone. As dawn came, the ground trembled for the first time since they arrived. It was a slow, deep vibration that made the air hum. Their equipment went dead. Their compasses spun. Their lights flickered. They ran outside and saw cracks opening across the land, stretching far like veins spreading toward the horizon. The fog lifted slightly, and for a short moment they saw something in the distance, a massive dark shape, rising slowly, like a mountain coming to life. Then the fog closed again, swallowing it from view. They stood frozen. Not knowing if they had seen real or dream, the leader ordered immediate lockdown. He said they would wait for daylight and send another signal for help, but everyone knew deep inside that no one would come, because no one could. The zone had cut them off. It was now their world, and they were trapped inside it. That night was the longest. The wind screamed through the cracks, and the air grew colder. They huddled together, listening to the ground breathing below, and for the first time the Deathworlders began to pray, not to any god they knew, but to whatever was listening, hoping that maybe it would let them leave in peace, because they finally understood that they were no longer explorers. They were intruders, and something in the zone wanted them to remember that forever. The fog did not leave the ridge for many days. It hung like a curtain over everything, and the Deathworlders stayed close together, afraid to go far from the camp. They tried to act strong, but inside they felt weak and lost. Their machines still did not work, and their communication systems were only static. Sometimes they thought they heard voices in the static, whispering words they could almost understand, but when they listened harder, it turned into noise again. One of the soldiers said he heard his own name through the radio, and that night he disappeared without taking his weapon or gear. They found his footprints leading toward the edge of the ridge, then nothing after that, only smooth ground like he had never been there. The leader stopped sending scouting teams. He said they would stay put until help came. But deep down he knew no help was coming. He didn't tell the others that the control center had stopped answering their calls completely. Now the line was dead. He didn't know if it was because the zone had blocked it, or because Earth itself had decided to abandon them. Maybe they were already marked as lost. The sickness spread faster now. The skin of many soldiers turned pale gray, their eyes sunken, their breath short. Even the strongest ones could not eat or sleep properly. They all shared the same dream of walking in endless fog, following a light that always stayed far away. Some said they saw shapes beside them in the dream, walking silently like shadows that were not their own. They would wake up sweating and shaking, and when they looked around they would see the same fog outside glowing, faintly, like the dream never really ended. One day a group of 10 went to the lower part of the ridge to collect clean water from a stream. When they came back they were quiet, their faces blank. They said nothing for hours. Then one of them started laughing in a strange way, the kind of laugh that had no joy. Another began crying. Then they both stopped moving, their bodies still breathing but their eyes staring into nothing. When the medics checked them, their hearts were beating slowly out of rhythm, and their pupils were wide open like they had seen something that broke their minds. They were moved to a separate tent, but by morning the tent was empty. Both gone again. The leader walked outside and stared into the fog, thinking of what to do. He had never faced fear like this before. His whole life had been built on strength and control, but now he felt small and powerless. He thought maybe they had been wrong about Earth. Maybe it was not a weak world. Maybe it was a place that tested the mind instead of the body, and no matter how strong their armor or training was, it could not save them from what they could not see. The weather changed again. The air turned colder and the sky darker. Even during the day they could not tell where the sun was. Thunder rolled, but no rain came. Instead, the ground began to shake softly like a heartbeat under their feet. Some of the Soldiers knelt down, pressing their ears to the soil, and said they could hear something moving deep below. Something big. Something slow. The leader told them to stop listening. But it was too late. The fear had already grown inside everyone. That night they saw lights again floating between the fog. At first they looked like stars low to the ground, moving gently. Then more appeared, forming lines and shapes like figures walking. The soldiers raised their weapons, but the lights did not. Stop. They came closer until they were only a few steps away and then vanished, leaving behind a smell like burnt metal. One soldier dropped his weapon and screamed that he saw faces inside the lights, faces that looked like their lost friends calling for help, but when he ran forward to reach them, he fell and never got up. They pulled his body back, cold and stiff, his eyes wide open and black. The leader ordered all fires out and everyone to stay quiet. He thought maybe sound attracted. Whatever was in the fog, they sat in silence for hours, listening to the strange hum that filled the air, like a deep song coming from far underground. One of the engineers tried to record it, but the recorder melted in her hand, leaving only smoke. She cried, saying she felt the sound inside her head like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. On the 4th week, they had only around 1,000 left. The rest were gone, either dead, lost, or taken by the fog. The food was running low and the sickness had taken their strength still. The leader refused to give up. He said they would move again, toward the ruins of the old plant. Maybe they could find working equipment there. Maybe they could signal their ships in orbit and escape the zone. It was their last hope, so they packed what was left of their supplies and began walking. The march was slow and painful. The fog grew thicker every step, and sometimes it felt like the ground shifted behind them when they turned back. The footprints they had left were gone, completely erased. The wind blew in small circles, carrying whispers that sounded like their own voices, repeating their thoughts out loud. One soldier fell to his knees, saying he could hear his mother calling him home. The leader tried to pull him up, but the man refused to move. Then he began walking in the opposite direction into the white fog and vanished within seconds. They called his name again and again, but nothing answered. When they finally reached the old plant, it stood half buried in the ground, its metal walls bent and broken, its windows dark. They entered carefully, lights flickering. The place smelled of rust and dust. They found machines covered in strange growths, black vines that looked half metal, half living tissue. They tried to cut one and it bled thick, dark liquid that steamed on the floor. Everyone stepped back in fear. The leader ordered to burn it, but the fire did not catch the vines, only turned darker, as if absorbing the heat. Inside the main hall, they found old signs written in human language, words like quarantine danger, keep out, scratched and crossed out by hand. One wall had a message written with something that looked like dried mud. It said, "It learns fast. Don't let it hear you." The leader stared at the words, feeling a cold wave through his body. He didn't know who wrote it, but he knew it was a warning meant for them too. They set up camp inside the plant, thinking maybe the walls would keep the fog away. But that night the fog entered through cracks and doors without a sound, filling the hall like water. Several soldiers started coughing blood. One screamed, saying he saw something crawling along the ceiling. But when they looked, there was nothing, only the sound of metal creaking slowly. In the middle of the night, their alarms went off. Movement detected near the entrance. The leader grabbed his weapon and rushed there with others. They saw silhouettes standing outside, motionless, shaped like Deathworlders. He shouted for them to identify, but no one answered. He stepped closer and realized with horror that they were wearing the same armor as the missing patrols, their faces hidden behind broken helmets. They moved suddenly, all at once, their eyes glowing faint blue. And then they were gone again like smoke. The soldiers panicked, firing into the fog, bullets echoing into the dark. One of them screamed and fell, clutching his chest. But there was no wound, only fear. His heart had stopped. They dragged him inside, but he was already gone. They sealed the doors and waited for daylight. If daylight even existed anymore, they could not tell time any longer. The clocks had all stopped showing different hours, each one ticking out of sync. By the next morning, half of them were gone. The ones on the night watch simply disappeared. The floor was covered in wet footprints leading nowhere. The leader sat alone near the control panel, staring at the old maps on the wall, the red lines showing radiation zones and dead areas. Suddenly, he noticed something new blinking on the screen, a signal weak but clear. It came from the center of the zone, deep beyond the forest and the rivers. It was not human code and not Deathworlder either, but something in between, something alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't know if it was calling for help or warning them to stay away. He thought about leaving, but there was nowhere to go. The way back had vanished. The fog stretched in every direction, and even their strongest navigators could no longer tell north from south. He knew the only way was forward, and maybe if they reached that signal they could find the truth of what had happened here. Or maybe it would be the end of them all. He looked at the few who were still alive, their faces pale, their eyes dull, and said quietly, "We go at dawn." No one argued. They were too tired, too broken to resist. They packed what little they had left and sat waiting for the light. But the light never came, only a faint glow from the fog that never truly ended, and the sound of something breathing below, their feet slow and heavy like the heartbeat of the zone, waiting for them to take one more step closer. They left the broken plant at dawn, or what they thought was dawn, because the sky never really changed. The light came and went like a pulse in the fog, soft and slow. They moved quietly, their boots sinking into the damp ground. The leader walked. First, his eyes fixed ahead, following the weak signal that came from the heart of the zone behind him. The rest followed. About 800 left, all tired and thin, their armor dull, their movement slow. They no longer spoke much words, felt useless. Here the only sounds were their breathing and the faint hum of the wind that never stopped. The signal grew stronger as they went deeper. The sound of it made their ears ache. It came in waves, low and deep, like a drum beating under the earth sometimes. It felt like it was inside their own bodies. The medics said it was not normal sound, but something else. A vibration that touched the bones more than the ears. The leader said to keep moving. He didn't care what it was, only that it was the first clear sign of direction they had in weeks. As they walked, they saw more ruins half buried in the ground. Old buildings twisted into strange shapes as if melted by heat. One of the soldiers pointed out that the walls looked soft like wax, and when touched they were warm and seemed to move slightly under the skin. No one touched them again after that. Sometimes they thought they heard faint whispers coming from inside the walls, like something trapped and calling out softly. The leader told them to ignore it and keep moving forward. By midday, the fog thickened again and the ground turned black and shiny like glass. The air smelled of burnt metal. One soldier stumbled and fell, his hand touching the surface, and when he lifted it, his glove was smoking. He screamed as the glove melted away and the skin underneath turned dark. The medics tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. He lay there shaking, then stopped moving. They covered his body and left it behind. They had stopped, counting the dead days ago. The nights were worse. They could never tell when they were sleeping or awake. They would close their eyes and see lights moving inside their heads. Slow circles spinning over and over. They dreamed of their homes. But the faces of their families looked wrong. Their eyes empty, their voices flat. When they woke, they would find themselves holding weapons or walking in circles like sleepwalkers. The leader tried to stay awake, but even he could not fight the strange pull that made his thoughts heavy and slow. One evening they reached a valley filled with what looked like bones, not human, not Deathworlder either. They were huge, long curved shapes half buried in the ground, stretching for miles, some taller than the trees that still stood. The bones glowed, faintly in the fog, like they were alive. The soldiers moved between them carefully, afraid to make noise. They could hear faint echoes every time they stepped, like the bones were hollow, and something was moving inside them. At the center of the valley, they found an old human vehicle, rusted and broken, half swallowed by the earth. Inside it were bones, smaller this time. Human for sure. The remains of scientists. Maybe one of them still wore a badge with faded letters. They took nothing, only looked. In silence, the leader felt a deep pain in his chest as he realized that humans had been here before long ago, and they too had tried to fight this place and lost. When they left the valley, the fog followed again, thicker than ever. One of the engineers checked the scanners and said the signal was right ahead, less than a mile away. They could almost see shapes through the mist. Tall and thin, moving slowly in a circle. The leader raised his hand for silence. They watched the shapes sway back and forth, then stop. It looked like a gathering of shadows. The soldiers waited, holding their weapons close. Then one of the shapes turned its head toward them, and everything went silent. Even the wind. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the ground under their feet began to shake, soft at first, then stronger. The fog lifted just enough for them to see what stood ahead. It was not a group of shadows. It was a structure, tall and black, rising like a pillar from the ground covered in strange symbols that glowed faint red. The signal was coming from there. The closer they got, the louder it grew until their helmets vibrated, and the ground around them cracked like thin ice. The leader ordered half of them to stay back while he and a few others approached the pillar. The air felt thick, heavy with static. His head hurt. His heart pounded faster with every step. The symbols on the surface of the pillar changed like they were reacting to his presence. One of the medics said it looked alive, like it was breathing. Suddenly the pillar pulsed with light bright enough to blind them, and a deep sound filled the air. Not like a voice, but something close to a heartbeat. Then it stopped just as quickly, leaving only silence and a faint whisper that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It said, "You should not have come." The soldiers froze. No one spoke. They looked at each other, unsure if they all heard the same thing. The leader took a step closer and reached out his hand to touch the surface. But before he could, the ground split open around the base of the pillar. A dark mist rose out like smoke, and the light turned blue, cold and sharp. One of the soldiers screamed, saying he saw faces in the light, faces of the ones who had vanished. Calling his name, he ran forward, but the leader grabbed him, pulling him back as the mist spread faster, swallowing everything around them. They ran, trying to escape the valley, but the fog chased them, twisting through the air like it was alive. Some fell, others shouted names, but their voices faded quickly. The ground shook again, and the pillar began to sink into the earth. The leader looked back one last time and saw something rise behind it, a shape so large it covered the broken sky. For a moment it looked like wings spreading wide. Then everything went dark. When the shaking stopped, only about 300 were left. They found themselves on the edge of another ridge far from the valley. The fog behind them now glowing faint red. They could still hear the hum of the pillar deep below. Even though they had run for miles, the leader sat on the ground, his hands shaking. He whispered that they had woken something that was not meant to be found. The survivors built a small camp there. Too tired to move further, they tried to eat, but the food tasted of ash. They tried to rest, but the ground moved softly under them like breathing. One soldier said he saw something inside the fog, watching from afar, like a pair of eyes, bright and still. The leader told him to ignore it, but he saw it too, and he knew it was not his imagination. Days passed, but the fog never lifted. They counted their numbers again. Less than 300 now, and every night one or two went missing. They stopped searching, they stopped talking. Even the leader had no words left. Sometimes he would stare into the distance and whisper to himself that maybe the zone was not a place, but a living thing that had always been sleeping, waiting for someone strong enough to wake it, and that they were the fools who had done it. One morning they found strange marks around the camp circles, drawn in black mud with handprints all pointing inward. At first they thought it was some of their own going mad, but then they saw that the prints were too large, too deep, pressed into the soil like claws. The marks glowed faintly, and the ground around them smelled of metal and blood. The leader ordered to erase them, but when they poured water over the marks, the ground hissed and the prints only sank deeper. That night they heard footsteps around the camp, heavy, slow, moving in circles. One of the guards fired his weapon into the fog, but the sound just echoed and came back from the other side, louder than before. The leader shouted for silence, and they all listened, hearts pounding. The footsteps stopped, then came closer. One of the soldiers cried, saying he saw figures walking toward them, tall like Deathworlders, but wrong, their heads too thin, their arms too long. They didn't walk. They floated through the air, moving without sound. The soldiers opened fire again, but the bullets vanished into the fog. There was no scream, no hit, only silence. Then one by one the camp lights went out, leaving only darkness. The last thing they saw before everything turned black was the leader standing still, staring ahead at the shapes moving closer. His face pale, his eyes wide with the realization that this was not a fight they could win. The darkness stayed for a long time. No one knew if it was night or day anymore. The air felt thick like water, and breathing became hard. The survivors sat close together, their faces pale, their eyes moving fast at every sound. The fog was silent, now too silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and made every breath sound loud. The leader stayed awake, watching the fog, waiting for any movement. He held his weapon, but deep inside he knew it was useless against whatever lived in that place. When the lights came back, they were not from their camp. The fog itself began to glow soft and white. The soldiers lifted their heads and stared at it. The light moved slowly through the air like it was alive, forming long lines that looked like veins running across the ground and up the trees. One of the medics whispered that it was energy, maybe from the pillar or something beneath the earth. The leader said nothing. He only watched as the light spread further until everything around them shined with a faint blue glow. They started to move again, following the weak compass that still worked. The fog seemed to open a path for them this time, which made them uneasy. But they had no choice. They walked slowly through the glowing mist, their shadows stretching long and thin. One of the soldiers said, "The shadows looked strange, like they were moving differently from their bodies, but no one wanted to check it." They kept walking in silence, trying not to look at the ground too. Long after some hours, they reached what looked like an old human base hidden under vines and roots. The doors were broken and half buried in soil. They went inside and found the remains of machines covered in dust and strange markings on the walls. Some looked like human writing mixed with symbols they had seen on the black pillar. The leader looked at them closely and said, maybe humans had studied the zone before. Maybe they had built this place to contain something. The others searched the rooms and found food packs, long expired but still sealed. Some ate without caring about the taste. Hunger had made them desperate. In one room they found a large window showing the underground part of the zone, a deep pit glowing faint green. The light came from cracks in the ground like rivers of fire, but cold and silent. The leader looked down and saw movement inside the cracks, like shadows swimming slowly. One of the soldiers said it looked like the ground was breathing again. The leader told them to seal the room and move out, but before they could leave, the glass started to shake. A low hum filled the air again. It came from below, this time strong enough to make their bones hurt. The lights flickered and the walls began to twist, the metal bending like soft clay. The soldiers ran out into the open air and saw the ground split behind them. The old base collapsing into the earth. They kept running until they reached a hill and turned back. The pit was wider now, glowing brighter. The leader shouted for everyone to keep moving. He said the zone was waking again. They climbed the hill and reached an area filled with strange plants, glowing blue. Their roots spread across the rocks, pulsing with light. When one of the soldiers touched a leaf, it reacted, closing like a fist, and a faint sound came out like a sigh. They moved carefully through them, afraid to make noise. The plants seemed to follow their movement, turning slowly as they passed. One soldier whispered that the plants were watching them, and the others nodded, afraid to answer. At the top of the hill they stopped to rest. They could see far now, the fog below moving in slow waves like the surface of a sea. The leader looked through his scope and saw small lights flickering deep inside the fog. He counted more than 20. Moving in a straight line, he realized they were not lights but figures carrying something glowing. One of the engineers said, maybe they were other survivors, but the leader said no. They were too many and they moved too smooth, too fast, like they were not walking but floating. Night came again, if it could be called night. The air turned colder and the wind began to whisper faint words in a language none of them knew. One of the soldiers covered his ears, saying he could hear his own name being called. The leader told everyone to stay close and ignore the sounds, but they grew louder, stronger, like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. Then, suddenly everything stopped and the silence returned sharper than before. They waited, but nothing happened. When morning came, they found 2 more soldiers, missing their weapons left behind. Their footprints ended near the edge of the hill and vanished, like they had been lifted into the air. The leader searched the area, but there was no sign of struggle, no blood, no noise. He told the others to move on. They could not stay still, or they would all disappear next. As they walked down the hill, the fog thinned and they saw a wide plain ahead with strange black towers rising from the ground. The same kind they had seen before, only taller and glowing white instead of red. They decided to approach one. The leader said maybe it held answers, maybe a way out. The closer they got, the warmer the air became, like standing near a furnace. Even though there was no fire, the tower hummed softly, a rhythm that felt almost alive. One of the scientists said it was sending a signal, but not to them. Maybe to something under the ground, maybe to the same force that had built all this. The leader placed his hand on the surface and felt a vibration under the metal like a heartbeat. He pulled back quickly and ordered everyone to stay away. But it was too late. The ground shook again and cracks appeared, spreading fast. One of the soldiers fell and the others ran to pull him up. The earth split wider and a bright light came out, blinding them. When the light faded, the soldier was gone, swallowed by the ground. The leader shouted for everyone to move away. The towers began to pulse faster, the white light turning blue, and the air filled with a sound like metal grinding against metal. The soldiers ran in every direction, trying to escape the shaking earth. They stopped only when they reached a forest of dead trees, their trunks black and hollow. The fog could not enter there. It stayed outside, moving like a wall. The leader decided to camp there for the night. The place felt wrong, but it was the only safe spot left. They built a small fire and sat around it, their faces lit by the flames. One of them asked what the leader thought the zone really was. He looked into the fire for a long time before answering. He said, maybe it was alive. Maybe. It was never just land or air. Maybe it was something ancient that had been here before humans, before anyone, and it was angry that they had come. No one spoke after that. They just listened to the fire crackle until sleep took them. But sleep was not kind that night. They all dreamed the same dream, standing in the valley again, watching the black pillar sink into the ground, and something rise behind it, something too big to see clearly. But they all felt its eyes watching them when they woke. The fire was out and the fog had moved closer again, covering the forest edge like a living wall. The leader checked his group, only 200 left now. He looked at their tired faces and knew not all would make it out. The fog began to hum again, soft at first, then louder, like it was calling to them one by one. They stood up without knowing why and faced it. Their eyes empty, the leader shouted for them to stop, but they did not listen. They started walking into the fog like sleepwalkers. He ran after them, grabbing one by the arm. But the soldier's skin burned hot like metal, and when he turned to look at him, his eyes were bright blue like glass. The leader let go and stepped back in shock. The soldier smiled faintly, then vanished into the fog. By the time the light faded, only a few were left, maybe 50. They stood in silence, too afraid to move. The fog was still now calm, almost peaceful. The leader sat on the ground, his weapon heavy in his hands. He whispered that the zone did not kill it, changed it, took what it wanted, and left nothing. The others looked around and saw shapes in the distance, moving slow and smooth like the ones they had seen before. Maybe their lost friends. Maybe something else pretending to be them. No one could tell anymore. They waited for the sun, but it never came. Only the same pale light from the sky and the endless hum that filled the air. The leader stood up slowly and said they would keep moving. There had to be an end to the zone somewhere. Maybe the others who vanished had found it. Maybe not, but standing still would only make them next. The few left followed him without a word, walking into the pale fog again. Their steps slow and steady, the sound of the humming following them like a heartbeat that would never stop. The fog was thinner now, but the air was still heavy. It felt like walking through water. The few that were left could not speak anymore, their voices lost or maybe taken. The leader walked ahead, his steps slow, but steady, his eyes fixed on the faint light that shimmered in the distance behind him. The others followed, their faces pale, their movements stiff like machines. They had been walking for days with no food and no rest. Yet, none of them could stop something, kept pulling them forward, a soft sound deep in their heads like a whisper telling them to keep moving. The light ahead grew stronger, and they reached a wide field covered in black stones that shined like glass. The ground was smooth and cold. It stretched far until it met a tall wall made of the same black surface. The wall had no door, no mark, only smooth stone rising high into the pale sky. The leader touched it and felt a pulse under his fingers. The same rhythm they had heard since the first day, the heartbeat of the zone. He stepped back and looked at it, trying to understand what it wanted from them. One of the soldiers fell to his knees, crying without sound, his shoulders shaking. He pointed to the wall, and the others saw movement. Inside it, faint shadows like figures walking behind the surface. The leader stepped closer again and saw faces pressed against the stone for a second. He thought they were reflections, but then he realized they were the faces of those who had vanished. Their eyes open, their mouths moving without sound. The leader touched the wall again and the faces disappeared, leaving only the cold, smooth surface. He turned to the others and said they were too close now to turn back, that maybe this wall was the end or the beginning. None of them answered. They only waited as the ground began to tremble. The fog behind them thickened again, and the air filled with that deep hum that shook their bones. The black wall cracked from top to bottom, and light poured. Through the cracks, white and blinding, the leader covered his eyes, but he could still see shapes moving inside the light. Tall figures, slow and graceful. They stepped through the broken wall, their bodies glowing like fire but cold, their faces smooth and without eyes, yet somehow looking at them. The soldiers raised their weapons, but the leader shouted to hold fire. The figures stopped only a few steps away. They moved like they were floating, not walking. The hum grew louder, filling every corner. Of the air, one of the glowing figures lifted its hand, and the weapons of the soldiers melted in their grip, turning into dark dust that blew away in the wind. The leader felt a sharp pain in his head and dropped to one knee. Images flashed through, his mind of the earth breaking, of the fog spreading, of thousands of voices crying in silence. Then everything went still. When he opened his eyes, the figures were standing closer. He could see their faces now made of light and shadow, their mouths moving without sound, but he could hear their words inside his head. They said, "You have come too far." They said, "This world was never yours to enter." They said, "We sleep here and your kind has broken the silence." He tried to speak, but his voice failed. The words came out as whispers. The figures leaned closer, their faces inches away. He felt their thoughts pushing against his mind, showing him visions of the zone before it became what it was. Fields of green water clear as glass, then the same fields, burning in the sky filled with fire. He saw Deathworlders landing here long ago, the same as him. Their ships bright and strong, but the earth swallowed them all. He saw the first humans who came after trying to build walls and study the land. But the zone took them too. The leader fell forward, breathing hard. His hands shaking, he whispered that he understood now that this place was not meant to be lived in. Not by them. Not by anyone. The figures stepped back, and the cracks in the wall began to close, the light dimming. One of the soldiers shouted that they needed to leave before it sealed again. But the leader stayed still, looking at the light. He turned to his people and said that maybe the zone wanted them to carry its message. Maybe that was why it let them live this long. He told them to run, to find a way out while they still could. Some ran, some stayed frozen, watching the light grow stronger again. The fog rushed forward like a wave, swallowing everything in its path. The leader saw it coming and smiled. Weakly, he thought about his home, his family, the stars he once saw from above before the landing. He whispered that the zone had won, but maybe it had never been a fight at all. The light took him then, and the others too, until there was nothing left. But silence. Days passed, maybe weeks. The fog began to fade. The black wall stood still, cold and quiet again from the sky. The zone looked calm, only a wide circle of dark land surrounded by mist. The rescue ships arrived after months searching the entire region. They found no life signs, only broken machines and scattered armor pieces. The ground burned and glassy. The scientists said it was impossible for anything to survive there. Yet one signal still blinked weak from the center of the zone. A small group of rescuers landed, their suits heavy with protection. They moved slowly through the silent field, their boots cracking the thin glass ground. The fog was gone, but the air still shimmered with faint light. They followed the signal and found a broken recorder lying beside an old flag. The leader's flag, the metal half melted, but the signal still alive. They played the last message, and the voice was weak, almost gone. It said, "If anyone hears this, do not come back. This world is alive and it does not want us here." The rescuers stood in silence, the wind moving softly around them. One of them said maybe the zone was not killing them. Maybe it was defending itself. Another said maybe the leader was still out there somewhere, changed or trapped. The first said no. Nothing lives here, not anymore. They took the recorder and left the place the same way they came, without looking back. When they reached orbit, they sent the message to the command center, and the zone was marked as forbidden on all maps. No ship was allowed near it again. They called it the Silent Field, but among the Deathworlders it became known as the place where the earth breathed, a place that took 2,000 of their kind and gave only 5 back. The 5 who had stayed near the border, too weak to enter, too scared to turn back, they were found wandering weeks later, their eyes blank, their minds broken. They spoke of light and voices and said the zone had spoken to them. They said it was not done yet. The doctors tried to study them, but they never recovered. They kept repeating the same words over and over. The earth remembers, the earth breathes, the earth is watching. The leaders tried to hide the story, but whispers spread, and soon, every soldier knew the truth, that the zone was alive, that it had taken the best of them, and that one day it might wake again. Years passed and the zone stayed quiet. Satellites watched from far above and saw no movement, only the same smooth land and the faint shimmer of light deep under the surface. But sometimes at night, the sensors picked up a low hum like a heartbeat, coming from the center, soft but steady, as if the zone was sleeping again, waiting for something, waiting for someone. One of the scientists who had studied the recording said maybe the zone was not just one place. Maybe it was spreading slowly under the ground, changing the world little by little. He said maybe the fog was only the breath of something much larger that lived. Deep below, he said maybe the Deathworlders had only seen a small part of it. His words were ignored, but he never stopped watching the readings on his screen. Sometimes late at night, he would see small flashes of light near the border, and he would whisper to himself that they were still down there, the ones who never came back. The world forgot after some time. New wars, new discoveries. People stopped talking about the zone, but the satellites still listened, always hearing that faint pulse. The same rhythm that once made the soldiers' hearts shake, the hum of something ancient still alive deep in the ground, waiting for the next to come too close. The story of the 2000 Deathworlders became a warning, a tale told to new explorers. Before they set out, they said, remember the zone. Remember the ones who walked into the fog and never returned. And if you ever hear the hum in the air, turn back, because it means the earth is awake. Far below, where no light reached, something moved. The old wall cracked once more. A soft sound like breathing filled the dark, and a faint blue glow spread across the stones. It pulsed slow and calm, like a heart beginning to beat again, waiting for the next step, waiting for the next voice to break. The silence once more.